I never thought I'd find myself standing amidst ashes, holding proof that faith burns brighter than any fire. Over the years, I've heard stories, miraculous ones, about sacred objects that survived flames when nothing else did. But it wasn't until I experienced something firsthand, and later learned of others who went through the same, that I truly began to understand what it meant to witness divine protection. What I'll share with you today isn't fiction. These are true moments, my own and those of others, that left me shaken, awakened, and transformed. If you've ever questioned whether miracles still happen, stay with me. What you're about to hear may just answer that for you. The day it happened was quiet, still, almost deceptively peaceful. I was driving home from work in Virginia, lost in thought, when I noticed smoke curling into the sky ahead of me. Traffic slowed. Sirens cut through the air. I saw flames leaping from the wreckage of a car. My heart skipped. I pulled over with several others and watched helplessly as firefighters rushed to control the blaze. That was the moment my journey into witnessing the miraculous truly began. Because from those flames, intense, wild, all-consuming, something was about to emerge that would shift my understanding of what's possible in this world. When they finally put out the fire, what remained was a twisted, scorched shell of what had once been a car. I watched the firefighters approach it slowly, carefully, and then, like something out of a vision, I saw one of them pause, kneel, and pull something from the driver's seat. At first I couldn't make it out, but then I saw the shape. A book, a Bible. I remember thinking, no way. The car was gutted. Nothing inside could have survived that blaze. But the firefighter held it up, slightly charred at the edges, but the pages inside were pristine, untouched, whole. That sight punched the breath out of me. People started murmuring. Someone near me whispered, "It's a miracle." Another person crossed themselves, eyes wide. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stared at the Bible, shining like a beacon of peace against the chaos of destruction. The flames had licked everything in that vehicle. Seats, dashboard, metal had warped from the heat. But this book, this word of God, it had stood untouched. It wasn't just bizarre. It was sacred. Something in that moment shifted inside me. I wasn't a stranger to church, but I also wasn't someone who lived by daily faith. But standing there, I felt like God had shown up right in front of us. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed it again and again. The fire, the rescue, the Bible. I thought about what it meant. Was it a message? A warning? A sign? I couldn't stop thinking about how something so fragile had survived what nothing else could. I started reading more stories online. Bibles that didn't burn. Crosses that stayed standing in rubble. Icons that survived infernos. And then I came across one story that mirrored what I saw. A young man named James Carter had survived a fiery crash, and his Bible, given to him by his grandmother, was found unburned in the driver's seat. It was too similar to be coincidence. James's story touched me deeply. He spoke of how his grandmother had told him to keep the Bible close, that God would never abandon him. And after the crash, when he heard his Bible survived, it changed him. "It's like God is telling me something," he said. I believed him, because I felt it too. That moment had stirred something inside me, a longing maybe, or a realization, that I had been walking through life blind to the divine. James's words echoed my own thoughts. What else had I missed? What else had I dismissed as chance when maybe it was God? It was that experience that led me to share this story now. Because if you're watching this, it's not by accident. If you've ever felt forgotten, burned by life, or surrounded by ruin, I want you to know, miracles happen. Sometimes they're small. Sometimes they arrive in fire. But they happen. And they remind us that even when the world burns down around us, God's word endures. I invite you to keep listening. What I'm about to share next will take you even deeper into moments that defy explanation. Stay with me, because I promise it gets even more powerful from here. Before I move on to the next miracle, I want you to ask yourself something. What in your life feels like it's on fire right now? What feels destroyed, hopeless, too far gone? Keep that in mind. Because these stories, these divine encounters, they're not just historical accounts. They're mirrors, reminders, and sometimes they're the beginning of your own testimony. You just have to be willing to see it. I kept thinking about how fire, which devours everything in its path, had somehow respected the word. like it recognized something greater. The physical laws of nature didn't apply in that moment, and that idea haunted me. It made me question everything I thought I understood about the world. I started reaching out to people, asking if they'd ever seen something similar. That's when a friend sent me an article about a house fire in Florida. A family home burned to the ground, and yet, a framed image of the Virgin of Guadalupe stood untouched on a blackened wall. The frame was wooden, flammable, and yet, not even soot marked it. That detail gripped me, the absence of soot. It's not just that the picture survived, but that it survived without even evidence of the chaos that consumed everything else. That's what I kept circling back to. These miracles weren't loud. They weren't explosions of light or voices from heaven. They were quiet, subtle. They were small reminders left behind, like God whispering, "I'm still here." The Gonzalez family, who lived in that home, spoke about how that image had always been the center of their faith. After the fire, it became a symbol of something far greater, a message of endurance. When I saw the photo of that unburned image, I felt it in my chest, a tightening, like someone pressing gently against my heart to say, "Pay attention." These weren't just lucky breaks. They were too consistent, too precise, and each story carried a thread. A person struggling, hurting, surviving, and in the wreckage, a piece of the divine survived too. I started collecting these stories, not as proof for skeptics, but as reminders for the broken. For people like me who had once walked in faith, drifted away, and then been pulled back in when the world caught fire. I met a pastor online who had gone through something similar in California. His church was reduced to ashes in a wildfire, yet a statue of Jesus Christ remained unharmed. He told me, "We lost everything but the one thing that mattered." That hit me hard. It made me think about what I'd been prioritizing in life, what I thought mattered. Job titles, opinions, routine, versus what really does when everything's stripped away. Sometimes it takes a fire to expose the foundation, and if your foundation is faith, you'll find it still standing when the smoke clears. After that conversation, I walked into my living room, took my old Bible off the shelf and started reading again. I didn't open it like I used to. I opened it like it was alive, like it had something to say directly to me, and it did. Every word felt different, sharper, heavier, not because the Bible changed, but because I did. These miracles weren't just happening around me. They were changing me, rebuilding me. And I realized something powerful. You don't need a miracle to change, just a moment to open your eyes to one. I began sharing these stories with others. Some listened, others rolled their eyes. But I kept telling them, because you never know who's quietly standing in their own fire. People don't always show their ruins on the outside. They smile through it, carry on, pretend. But deep down, they're looking for proof that hope is real, that faith still has a place. And when they hear about these moments, unburned pictures, statues, crosses, they remember. They feel something stir, and that stirring can be the beginning of healing, of believing again. So if you're still with me, I want to tell you this. Don't underestimate the quiet signs, the untouched relics, the stories that sound too perfect to be coincidence. They're not random. They're for you. They're your invitation to go deeper. And if you've never asked God to show you He's real, try now. Not in grand gestures, but in small whispers. Because I promise, He answers. And sometimes His reply is found in the ashes, where everything burned, but one thing remained. The next miracle I encountered left me speechless for days. It wasn't just preserved. It was preserved beyond logic. This one took place in Siena, Italy, back in 1730. A historic event, yes, but not just a story from dusty church records. It's a testimony that still echoes centuries later. The consecrated hosts were stolen from a basilica, an act considered sacrilege, and yet days later they were returned. But here's the miracle. They were still fresh, intact, as if they had been consecrated that very morning. Science had no answer, and honestly, neither did I. What captured me wasn't just the mystery, it was the symbolism. The Eucharist represents Christ's body, His presence, and even when stolen, hidden, and likely exposed to the elements, that presence remained. It didn't decay, it didn't weaken, and neither does God's love. That's the real miracle, that he stays. Even when we take, misuse, or forget him, he doesn't rot away. He waits, whole, undiminished. It made me reflect on the times I had pushed faith to the side, acted on my own, and then wondered why I felt empty. You see, the spiritual isn't just about mystery, it's about memory. These stories serve as reminders that we are not alone, that something greater is always holding space for us to return. And the Siena miracle, it's not just a moment in Catholic history, it's a message. Even when everything else fades, faith doesn't. That truth anchored me, made me realize I'd been looking for certainty in all the wrong places. And when I finally stopped chasing logic and opened my heart, the evidence of the divine was all around me. I began to pray differently, not like I was tossing words into the sky, but like I was speaking to someone who had always been listening, and I asked for something I'd never had the courage to say before. Show me you're still here. That prayer changed everything, because God doesn't always respond with thunder or lightning. Sometimes he shows up in preserved pages, in unburned bread, in the silence that follows destruction. That's where faith is formed, in the stillness, after the fire. I started journaling again, writing down these stories, these reflections, these impossible truths, not just for myself, but for whoever might need them. Because if even one person reads this and finds hope, then the miracle continues. These testimonies don't end with the fire. They start there. They rise from the ashes and speak to whoever's ready to hear. So if your life feels like it's in ruins right now, listen closely. The miracle might already be unfolding. You just haven't seen it yet. There's a reason these sacred objects keep surviving when nothing else does. It's not because they're invincible. It's because they carry invincible meaning. They're reminders of covenant, of presence, of a God who doesn't leave. And when you're walking through a storm, sometimes all you need is a symbol to hold on to, a fragment of faith to steady your heart. And for me, these stories became that. Anchor points. Proof that even in the darkest hour, light breaks through. So I'll ask you again, what have you overlooked? What stories have you brushed off as folklore or coincidence? What if they're not just stories? What if they're sacred invitations? Today could be the day you stop doubting and start listening. You're not here by accident, and neither are these stories. They're waiting for someone just like you to see past the fire and into the miracle. There was a moment that completely unraveled me, not just emotionally, but spiritually. A fire had destroyed a centuries-old monastery in Northern California. Everything, chapels, books, relics, was lost. Everything except one thing. In the rubble, the monks found a perfectly preserved icon of Jesus Christ. Not a scratch, not a burn. The glass frame was melted, but the painting beneath, pristine. And not just any painting. It was one of their oldest, most sacred icons. I remember looking at the photos and feeling like I had just witnessed something sacred, something that demanded reverence. That image burned into my memory more deeply than the flames that consumed the monastery. Because to me, it wasn't just about survival. It was about presence. You have to understand, the monks weren't wealthy. They weren't famous. Their prayers weren't louder than anyone else's. And yet their sacred image was spared. Why? That question gripped me. Not as doubt, but as awe. As the kind of wonder that makes you whisper instead of speak. Because when God shows up like that, all you can do is fall quiet. I reached out to someone who had visited that monastery years ago. She told me it was the most peaceful place she'd ever stepped into. She said, "You could feel God breathing there." And that phrase stuck with me, God breathing, because that's what miracles feel like exhaled grace. And sometimes they come through things, through icons, through fire, through resilience. The monks didn't ask for a sign, but they got one, and it reminded them, and us, that when the building falls, faith can still stand tall. That was the lesson I needed, because I'd built my life around external things, comfort, approval, routine. But when things burned down, relationships, finances, even parts of myself, I realized I needed something internal, something unburnable. And that's what faith is. Not something to show off, but something to return to. Something that survives, even when everything else doesn't. That icon reminded me that God doesn't need a cathedral to prove he's present. He just needs space and surrender. So I created space. I carved time into my days for silence, for prayer, for noticing. And that's when I started to see him again, not just in preserved paintings, but in preserved hope, in friends who stayed, in strangers who offered kindness, in the quiet strength that showed up just when I thought I'd collapse. That's how faith grows, not through answers, but through survival. And those stories, the monks, the icon, the miracle, they became more than inspiration. They became instruction. If you're wondering whether you're worth a miracle, let me tell you something that changed me. God doesn't reserve miracles for the elite. He gives them to the ordinary, to monks in the woods, to mothers in burned homes, to doubters, to people like me, and maybe people like you. It's not about deserving, it's about receiving. And the moment you open your heart to even the possibility of the divine, you'll start seeing what you thought was impossible, over and over again. So don't wait for life to burn down before you believe. Don't wait for everything to collapse before you turn toward what truly holds. You can start now, in this moment. Just say it. God, show me. That's all it takes. He hears you. He sees you. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice. He's already speaking. The Notre Dame fire felt like the entire world stopped breathing. I remember watching it unfold on the news, heart pounding. Centuries of history, art, architecture, worship, swallowed in flames. I wasn't Catholic, but it didn't matter. That cathedral belonged to the soul of humanity. And yet, when the smoke cleared, the altar stood. The cross gleamed. The stained glass rose windows, incredibly, remained. It was as if the fire had devoured everything but the sacred. That image, the golden cross glowing through the smoke, pierced me, not just visually, but spiritually. It was a living metaphor. The fire was real, the destruction was massive, but the symbol of salvation, unscathed. That's not coincidence. That's divine punctuation, a holy exclamation mark. And it reminded me that even in the global tragedies, ones that touch millions, God still whispers, I am here. It's never about what burns. It's always about what remains. I began to understand why people across the world wept at the sight of that cross. It wasn't just grief. It was reverence. Reverence for a God who doesn't disappear when the flames come. And in the midst of my own smaller fires, it reminded me to look for the gleam, the thing that doesn't shatter, that remains firm. And for me, that became the word, the cross, the presence that doesn't flee in suffering but draws closer. The Notre Dame fire taught me that loss can be sacred, that even in devastation there can be preservation, not just of artifacts, but of purpose, of belief, of beauty. What we think is an ending is often just a reintroduction to what matters most. I had spent so much time chasing perfection, control, achievement, and when those burned away, all that was left was the cross, shining, waiting, enough. We're often told that miracles are for the desperate, but I've learned that they're also for the aware, for the willing, for the open-hearted. God doesn't need disaster to show up, but sometimes disaster clears the clutter so we notice. That's what happened to me. Watching Notre Dame burn, I realized how fragile life is, and yet how powerful faith can be. It doesn't prevent the fire, but it protects something through it. And that's what I want you to hear. If you're going through something that feels catastrophic, don't focus on what's burning. Look for what's still standing. That's where your miracle is. That's where your hope is. That's where God meets you, not in the avoidance of pain, but in the endurance of it. And the cross? It's not just a symbol of salvation. It's a symbol of survival. So next time you see fire, literal or metaphorical, don't panic. Watch. Wait. There might be something in the flames that wasn't meant to be consumed, and it could change everything you believe. The wildfire in Gatlinburg, Tennessee was brutal. Nature turned violent. People lost everything. But in the middle of that destruction stood something impossible. The church bell from St. Mary's Episcopal. The church was gone. Roof, pews, sanctuary, all reduced to ash. And yet that bell, which had called people to worship for generations, stood untouched. The town couldn't believe it. Neither could I. I remember watching footage of it. The bell sitting solemn and whole amid blackened rubble. It didn't just survive. It remained pure. Even cool to the touch, someone said. It defied everything we know about metal and fire. And just like that, a bell became a sermon, a monument of perseverance, a testimony in bronze. And I knew this wasn't random. This was another echo of the same voice I'd been hearing all along. Reverend Marco, the pastor, said it best. It's a sign from God that he hasn't abandoned us. And I believe him, because abandonment is the lie we most often believe in pain, that we've been left, forgotten. And yet the bell rang truer in silence than it ever had in sound. It became a symbol, not of what was lost, but of what could be rebuilt. And sometimes, that's the miracle we need most. I think about what I would have done if I'd been in that congregation, watching everything burn. Would I have given up, walked away from faith? Or would I have let the bell remind me to keep believing? That's what these stories do. They give you a choice, to turn bitter or to turn toward the divine. And when you choose the latter, you begin to see fire not as punishment, but as purification. I've carried a photo of that bell ever since, not because I worship relics, but because I need reminders. I need to remember that endurance is holy, that the things God ordains are not easily destroyed, that our calling, like that bell, can still ring after everything else has fallen. And that's what faith is. It's not flashy. It's forged. You might be walking through your own version of Gatlinburg right now. Things lost, people gone, dreams burned. But I'm here to tell you, the bell might still be there. You might still have something sacred, untouched, and that's enough to start over, to rebuild, to believe again. Let that bell be your beginning, not your end. When you're ready, ring it, not with your hand, but with your hope. Let the sound of faith carry across your ruins. It may not change the past, but it will absolutely reshape your future. And now if you've made it this far, I want to thank you, not just for watching, but for staying open, for leaning in, for allowing these stories to speak to you. Because this wasn't just about fire and miracles. This was about the things in your life that feel lost, the parts of your heart that feel burned out, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, something sacred could still be standing. These weren't just stories of survival. They were signs. Signs that point us back to the truth. God is real, God is near, and He is not finished with you. What we've seen together in this journey, unburned Bibles, untouched icons, surviving bells and crosses, isn't just a pattern of mysterious exceptions. It's a message. God is not silent. He's not hiding. He's still speaking through the ashes. And maybe right now, He's speaking to you. Maybe this was the reminder you've been needing. Not just to believe in miracles, but to believe that you are worth one, that your story matters, that you haven't been forgotten. So if you feel that stirring in your chest right now, don't ignore it. That's not emotion. That's invitation. A call back to faith. A call back to Jesus. And if you don't know where to start here. Start now. Say His name. Ask Him to step into your ruins. And I promise, He will. He's never been afraid of fire. He walks through it with you, just like He always has. And if this message reached your heart today, I want to ask you to do something simple, but powerful. Subscribe to this channel and follow Jesus. Not just with a click, but with your heart. Join a community of people just like you. People who've been through the flames and still believe. People who are looking for truth and finding it in the one who never changes. Don't walk this journey alone. Let's keep walking it together. Share this video with someone who needs hope. Comment below with your own story or what stood out to you. And come back. Come back every week, because we're not done. There are more stories to tell, more miracles to witness, more reasons to believe. This isn't just a video, it's the beginning of something holy, and I want you to be part of it. So until next time, keep your eyes open, watch for the signs, and remember, when everything around you burns, the word still stands, the cross still shines, and God is still there, waiting, whispering, ready to make beauty from ashes. You're not alone. You never were, and you never will be. With all my heart, thank you for being here. I'll see you soon. Keep the faith, keep seeking, keep standing.